I'ma get that money. Money.
Jim Crow businesses emerged as a solution to the segregation system in place during the late 1800s to mid-1960s. The laws mandated separate and unequal facilities for black people in education, housing, health care, and recreation. To meet the growing demand for separate spaces, black entrepreneurs stepped up and established their own businesses in response to these discriminatory laws and practices. I'll tell you more about it coming up. This is KRT, Critical Race Theory. It's not the one they teach in law schools, but the one banned in public schools. Jim Crow laws, first enacted in the 1880s by angry and resentful Southern whites against freed African Americans, separated blacks from whites in all aspects of daily life. Favoring whites and repressing blacks, these became an institutionalized form of inequality. Jim Crow was a character first created for a minstrel show act during the 1830s. The act, featuring a white actor wearing black makeup, was meant to demean and make fun of African Americans. In the Plessy versus Ferguson case of 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that states had the legal power to require segregation between blacks and whites. Jim Crow laws spread across the South virtually everywhere that the two races might come in contact. The segregation caused by Jim Crow created opportunities for African Americans to start their own businesses as they were cut off from white communities and white businesses refused to serve them. The more cut off that black communities became from white communities and the more that white businessmen refused to cater to black customers, the more possible it became for enterprising black entrepreneurs to create viable businesses of their own. Most of these businesses were local, small-scale, and family-run. Many black entrepreneurs followed the principles of Booker T. Washington and established local, small-scale businesses with their families. Washington advocated economic development as the best path to racial advancement and the means to eventually challenging the racial prejudice of Jim Crow. Black barbers had cut white customers' hair as part of their traditional second-class status in service to white people for a long time. But by the early 20th century, white patrons had begun to shift their business to white-owned shops. So, a new generation of black barbers stepped in and proudly established shops within their own communities, catering to a growing black consumer market. They knew that their white counterparts would offer no competition, as they did not want the close contact with blacks that cutting hair demanded. Nor could white barbers offer black men the kind of haircut and shave that they themselves knew how to give. The cost to enter the field was low, but black barbers' status was high. Men congregated and felt comfortable in those shops, and conversation flowed freely, both about local goings-on and larger racial matters that concerned them all. The rise of black female beauty culture paralleled larger trends in society, especially the influence of mass media like movies and popular magazines. Several black female entrepreneurs spearheaded an emerging beauty culture industry. The most famous of those was Madam C.J. Walker. Some enterprising black women, initially trained as agents to sell special hair preparation and cosmetic products, so-called beauty systems, eventually opened their own beauty shops and permanent spaces to facilitate their work as beauty culturists. With the little capital needed to start their own businesses, they could free themselves from economic dependence on their husbands or on white employers. Beauty parlors became places where black women could indulge in moments of pampering, self-indulgence, and relaxation while also letting off steam, gossiping, and speaking their minds. By the 1920s, funeral homes had emerged across the country as primary locations for carrying out the responsibilities of handling and burying the deceased. These first emerged in large towns and cities and gradually spread to rural regions. Funeral homes became a particularly lucrative avenue of entrepreneurship for blacks, which lacked white competition because of the close physical contact that was involved in this work. When African Americans were excluded from joining the National Funeral Directors Association, they organized their own independent organization in 1925. People entrusted black undertakers and funeral directors in their communities with the proper and responsible treatment of their deceased loved ones. Some black funeral homes flourished through aggressive marketing and modern amenities like spacious limousines. During the Jim Crow era, segregation may have been the law in the South, but it was just as apparent in northern and Midwestern cities. Restaurants, cafes, taverns, and liquor stores thrived in black neighborhoods, established by local businessmen and geared to local customers. One of the most difficult and risky aspects of cross-country travel for African Americans was the question of where to stay overnight. The Negro Motorist Green Book attempted to update its listings as often as possible, while word of mouth helped African Americans learn of safe places for travelers who often drove miles out of their way to get to them. But the fact remained that the most extensive listings of hotels and motels were in northern metropolises with large populations of black Americans. In smaller towns, a tourist home or two might be listed. That meant staying in a room in someone's house. Many towns lacked even a single listing. In 1954, a new kind of black-owned lodging opened in Birmingham, Alabama, coinciding with a Black Baptist convention in town. It was billed as the nation's newest and finest motel. It was built, owned, and run by pioneering black entrepreneur Arthur G. Gaston. Gaston also established several other businesses in Birmingham, including a bank, radio stations, the Booker T. Washington Insurance Company, a funeral home, and a construction company. The A.G. Gaston Motel included 32 rooms, each with their own air conditioning and telephone. Gaston remarked that opening the motel means that many persons passing through our city will have a fine place to stay. In 1963, the Gaston Motel became the epicenter of Birmingham's civil rights protests and demonstrations. In 1959, Berry Gordy Jr., the founder of Motown Records in Detroit, Michigan, created a business that successfully bridged the Jim Crow era and the post-Civil Rights Act era. He accomplished this by accurately predicting the coming of an integrated market of consumers for black popular music. In 1922, Gordy's father, Barry Sr., moved his family to Detroit from Georgia. He faced hostility and potential violence from local whites when his food distribution business proved too successful. The area was steeped in Jim Crow laws and practices. In Detroit, Barry Sr. established the Booker T. Washington grocery store in the black working class neighborhood of Detroit, which soon also became highly successful. Barry Jr. first dreamed of becoming a famous boxer, but he eventually gravitated to his other interest, music. From record store owner to songwriter to multi-million-dollar record producer and distributor, Gordy used his business savvy to redefine black music coming out of Detroit as popular music that both blacks and whites would want to hear and buy. The Jim Crow era provided the force for a number of black businesses to grow and flourish, instilling a symbol of racial progress and promising safe places to do business and socialize. The conversation and ideas that flowed freely in black business establishments also helped raise consciousness and establish a sense of solidarity within black neighborhoods. When the civil rights movement gained momentum, many black entrepreneurs did what they could to support the movement. After the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964 and segregation was declared illegal, black entrepreneurs could take pride in the role they had played in the civil rights movement, despite the fact that the future viability of their segregated businesses were now in jeopardy. A piece of history you won't see in any textbook. This has been KRT, Critical Race Theory. Thanks for checking in. Please like and subscribe and share this video with your friends and family. We'll see you next time.